All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. So we are continuing, actually, we're going to conclude in Meretz Hashem today, Os Nun Hey in Tzidkas HaTzaddik. So the Rebbe ends off, we began the last section of this Os yesterday, focusing on the idea where the Rebbe explains the juxtaposition between the mitzvah of Tzitzis and the Makoshesh. So remember again, Makoshesh was the individual who was Mechalel Shabbos. He gathered wood, he chopped down wood, he went ahead and was Mechalel Shabbos. And right afterwards, the Torah introduces to us the mitzvah of Tzitzis. So the Rebbe explains so beautifully on page Kuf Lamed Dalid. So the Rebbe writes, V'chein Amru Kadmonim, we actually skipped down a little bit in that paragraph in the Biurei Chasidus on the right hand side. So the Rebbe says, how is it that the Makoshesh came to be Mechalel Shabbos? So the Rebbe posits it's because on Shabbos, one does not have the reminder, one does not have the consistent reminder, ultimately, of Tefillin. Tefillin usually serves as an os. Thank you so much, Sherman. Tefillin usually serves as an os. Perfect. I'll plug it right afterwards. Thank you. Tefillin serves as an os. And on Shabbos, the individual, he lacked the mitzvah of tefillin. So because he lacked that os, because ultimately, again, he lacked that reminder, therefore, again, he was mechalel Shabbos. So what happens? Immediately afterwards, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us the mitzvah of tzitzis. And that mitzvah of tzitzis is there to serve as a perpetual reminder. What's the goal of the reminder? The goal of the reminder is to take those things that we know intellectually and to ensure that we know them emotionally. So the Rebbe points out something incredible. He says, "Kedei shelo ye'era od davar kazeh la'adam Yisrael, l'shkoach shehu yom Shabbos sha'asr la'asaz v'amalacha v'makavana shatzitzis mo'ila la'adam shol l'shkoach ha'saydi v'moach." So remember again, let's talk about this in just a moment. So the mitzvah of tzitzis is there to remind me that I shouldn't forget that it's Shabbos and come to Chas v'Shalom be Mechalel Shabbos. So we'll say, let's be clear. The Makoshesh was mazid, right? The Makoshesh intentionally violated Shabbos. So it's not the pshat that the Makoshesh forgot, right? We think about this. Oh, so now I have tzitzis, I have a reminder. It's not the pshat that the Makoshesh forgot about Shabbos, and therefore he violated Shabbos. The Makoshesh absolutely knew about Shabbos. He was a mazid. He was an intentional violator of Shabbos. So because of that, says the Rebbe something amazing. What does the mitzvah of tzitzis do? The Makoshesh was intellectually aware of Shabbos. It's just he experienced a level of emotional forgetfulness. The point of the mitzvah is to take that which we know intellectually and now to infuse it emotionally. Hari Makoshesh, just the last part of that section, Hari Makoshesh, Haya, Mesit Haya, Kishichel As HaShabbos, Shari Ne'anash B'misa B'skila Al Avonzeh, Ve'im Kin Vadei Shebemocha Yada Beber Es Kol Chumras HaIser, Ve'eno Ezo Zechira Haisa Chaser Lo, Kedei Lemono Min Avera, Ele Mukach Mikach Shekavanas HaTorah L'Zchira, Hainu Hargoshas Hadavar Bepninius Halev, Ve'achin Mitzas Tzitzis, Ma'oreres es ha'adam le'zechirazu. Seif will say, to be clear, the Makoshesh wasn't lacking in intellectual awareness. After all, he was mazid. Mazid means, I know what I'm doing, I know that it's wrong, but I do it anyway. How could a person get to that kind of level if they have an awareness? Very simple, says the Rebbe, because at the end of the day, things that I know intellectually, I can choose to ignore. Things that I know emotionally, you should remember again, I can choose to ignore that also, but it's much less likely that I go ahead and ignore things that I know emotionally. The point, therefore, of a mitzvah, and I've said, is incredibly profound. The point of a mitzvah is to take something from the level of intellectual awareness and transform it ultimately into emotional awareness. That's the goal. That's the goal. That's the yesod. I just want to point out, it's not unique to tzitzis. Just to be clear, what the HaTzaddik is suggesting is this may be a concept with all mitzvahs in general, that the goal of a mitzvah is to take intellectual knowledge and transform it into emotional knowledge. The more I serve the Ribono Shel Olam through the medium of mitzvahs, the more I go ahead and create an emotional awareness, an emotional knowledge about the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, about the importance of the Ribono Shel Olam, and the way that's able to shape my day-to-day living. So we'll say an incredible yisod. Now he ends off the section or he ends off the os with one more piece. Again, so Reb Tzaddik's premise, because this is going to be a little bit of a different application, Reb Tzaddik's premise, therefore, is that halacha l'maisa, I go ahead. Did I do something wrong? Did I forget something?
Dreaming.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Reb Tzaddik's premise is that two levels of knowledge: intellectual knowledge, emotional knowledge, right? And the idea that I can know something intellectually, I can ignore it. The goal is to create emotional knowledge. Now Reb Tzaddik says, how do you create emotional knowledge? Mitzvahs. Mitzvahs, that's what a mitzvah does. A mitzvah, which is reinforcing positive behaviors, goes ahead and takes that which I know intellectually and transforms it into the emotional awareness as well. Now Reb Tzaddik ends off with one last piece. He says there's another way to create emotional knowledge and emotional awareness. He says how? This is incredible. He says, Amru Chazal, Parakama de Masechas Nedarim, Sha'afa Pisha Asr li Adam li Shava Shal Tzorech. Even though normally a person cannot go ahead and swear for no purpose, right? We take an oath exceptionally carefully. He says, "Aval mitzvah lihios nishboim lekayim hamitzvos." But it's very interesting. There's a concept of swearing in order to perform a mitzvah. So I take an oath, I take a shavua to obligate myself in the performance of a mitzvah. Kilomar, mitzvah shehe adam nishba lekayim mitzvah, kedei sheyimaher v'yizdares lekaymo. והגימורה מבארת שם, שאף על גב כל אחד מישראל כבר מושפע ואומן בהר סיני, לקיים את כל המצוות, ואם כן אין השבוע חל הכלל, והרי שבוע זו שנשבע היא שלא לצורך. Suppose to listen to this. There's a concept of nishpa לקיים את המצווה. So there's a concept ultimately again of swearing to perform a mitzvah. Now, such an oath is incredibly strange. Why? Because at the end of the day, I'm already bound to perform a mitzvah. So why would there be a concept of swearing to perform a mitzvah? So he goes on, he says, even though I'm already bound to go ahead and perform mitzvos, nevertheless, what's the role of this shvuah? Lizaruze nafshe. Lizaruze nafshe will say, in order to go ahead and give myself zrizus, in order to go ahead and act in an alacritous fashion, in order to spur myself to continued dynamic activity. He goes on, he says, V'lechora adayin kasha halo in shvua zu mosifa shum israelov ve'im kein maz zerusu ve'echu poel umoil adam sheikaimas osa mitzvah shenishbala asosa ava muchach mizeh shazerusu shebeemtzaz haskaras hashvua befiv nichneses hargoshas chumras hamitzvah lepnimiyas halev. So we'll say this is incredibly profound. So Tzaddik says, what does it mean to take a shavua to perform a mitzvah? Right? What does that mean? I'm already what we call mushba v'omed. I already have an obligation to perform the mitzvah. So what does the shavua do? Right? I swear I'm going to put on tefillin, so to speak. Right? I swear I'm going to keep Shabbos. I swear I'm going to go ahead and learn Torah. I'm already obligated to do those things. So we'll see it. Interestingly enough, what does a shavua do? A shavua encourages action. How does a shavua encourage action? By articulating a promise to one's self. One goes ahead and pushes oneself towards enhanced dynamic activity. So here Reb Tzaddik introduces something else. That sometimes the way to take something from intellectual knowledge to emotional knowledge is to articulate one's personalistic obligation. You see, this goes back, we spoke about this on Shabbos as well. This goes back to something we spoke about before, which is when you speak things out, you create a reality. This is why Rebbe Soloveitchik, I mentioned this on Shabbos, Rebbe Soloveitchik points out, Rambam in Hilchos Tshuva, Parak Aleph, Halacha Aleph says, that Kishiyasa Tshuva, Chayev lehisvados. When a person does Tshuva, the first thing I'm obligated to do is vidui, is confession. Why? Because when I commit an Aveira, and the Aveira just lives up here, lives in my mind, it's easy to rationalize, and it's easy to explain away. But the moment I do a vidui, and I articulate that which I have done wrong, chatasi avisi pashati, I've articulated the fact that I committed an Aveira, suddenly again it takes on a reality onto itself. It's the same idea, says HaTzaddik. When I go ahead and I articulate that I have an obligation, right, to do a mitzvah, so what have I subtly done? Suddenly I've gone ahead and I've created a reality. So that no longer could this just go ahead and remain as intellectual knowledge, but suddenly it becomes an emotional awareness as well. So we'll have to stop with this over here today because it's already time for the daf. But Lamaisa, what I want to point out is really something dramatically amazing, which is that at the end there, HaTzaddik says the goal is to create emotional awareness. Because I can ignore that which I know intellectually, but it's much more difficult to ignore that which I know emotionally. How do you create emotional awareness? Possibility number one, mitzvos. Mitzvos, behaviors. Constantly reinforcing that which I'm supposed to be doing behaviorally creates an emotional awareness. And number two, says Reb Tzaddik, is a shvuah. Is articulating, and now by the way, shvuah doesn't literally mean you have to take a shvuah. It means articulating a promise to one's self. I will say, create personal expectations. So many times in life, we don't create expectations of ourselves, right? We make excuses for ourselves. I don't do this because of this, or I behave like this because of this, or this one did this. That's all fine. Again, we all know we all do it, and we all make excuses for ourselves. It doesn't generally get us too far. But to articulate expectations for oneself. What's my expectation of me? That's what Reb Tzaddik says. That's what it means to take a shvuah, to be mekayim a mitzvah. I articulate an expectation of myself. I'm going to do X. I'm going to do Y. I'm going to live up to this standard. I'm going to accomplish this. When a person does that, says Reb Tzaddik, you take the intellectual knowledge and you create emotional awareness. And when you create emotional awareness, create emotional knowledge, then it's much easier to remember HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's much easier to remember mitzvos, and it's much easier to remember ultimately those obligations I have to myself. We'll have to stop over here. We'll Emir Hashem maybe spend a little bit of the first part of tomorrow morning shir focusing on Nun Hey, and then Emir Hashem will transition to Nun Dalet. Shkach Bosai.